So those were sort of our parameters, our marching orders to come up with a plan. And I sort of just took a step back and said, forget everything that's been going on. If we were approaching this in the proper way, where would we put 529 units in a way that most affirmatively furthers fair housing, which is our legal obligation? Well, the first thing I knew is I didn't know. I'm not an expert in that issue. And so I started researching to find an expert who does this. And I found Dr. Kirk McClure, a professor from the University of Kansas. He's worked on and off for HUD as a primary investigator on fair housing issues for 20 years. He's also managed local housing authorities, and now he's currently in academia as a professor of urban planning. I reached out to him, and he agreed to help. I asked him how much he would charge, and he said, well, I do this, the university lets me do this for people. I'm not going to charge you for my time. If I have expenses, I'll charge you, but he hasn't charged me anything yet. He's that kind of guy. So he prepared this plan, which is Appendix 2 on the materials I provided you. And basically, my question to him was open-ended. Where should we put the units in a way that most affirmatively furthers fair housing? I also asked him about the mixed income projects that had been developed and whether or not those would meet the criteria. Now, as far as affirmatively furthering fair housing, the key is to find what are called high opportunity areas. That's part of the purpose, which is to deconcentrate poverty and to desegregate racially. And that's why they focus on these high opportunity areas. There are various criteria. The primary ones are less than 10% poverty rate in the areas, less than 8% unemployment, educational criteria, and only 4% or less are already in subsidized housing. And they go by what are called census tracts. Those are developed independently by the U.S. Census Bureau. There are 22 of them on the island, 66 of them countywide in Galveston. His results of his analysis were that there are only 3 census tracts on the island that meet the requirements of being high opportunity areas where public housing and subsidized housing should be considered. Those are identified in the report. Well, 2 of them, well, they are in order. The Denver area between 53rd and 45th. There are also Harve-Lafitte area down towards Stewart Road, south from there. And then on Cove View, heading west, but it goes out past the end of the seawall, which we've been told does not meet criteria for public housing on the west end. So those are the areas that were defined. Those areas have no land masses on which to build, an occasional lot here and there, but they're pretty well built out. As far as the mainland, there are 21 census tracts. And those census tracts were done when Galveston had a population of 70,000, the county had a population of 200,000. They're population based, that's why we have a third of them here. Those other mainland census tracts are much larger. And there are 21 of them that are high opportunity areas. And within those, I cross-referenced with the Galveston Central Appraisal District, and there are over 6,300 existing apartment complexes or units in those areas. On the island, I also looked at existing apartment units in and around those 3 census tracts that I talked about above. And based upon that, this proposal we would acquire up to 150 existing units in and around these areas. Some of them, I mean, adjectives are in the eyes of the beholder to describe them, but some of them are a little aged, they've been there a while, they could be better maintained. My idea would be we could buy them in small groups, small unit, 10, 20 units or so, and accumulate from a base of over 900 enough in which to get up to 150 units of public housing. We could acquire those, make them nicer, police them, protect the tenants, and make sure the neighbors are treated properly as well. And I think we could do something that would actually be a benefit. And the rest, we would secure project-based vouchers in those high opportunity areas on the mainland. All the ones to get us to the balance of 529 which would not, which we could not do here on the island. And so that's sort of the meat of this plan. Now, I also asked Dr. McClure to tell me about mixed income. Granted, these Magnolia Homes is in a poverty area where it exceeds 25% poverty, close to 30%. Cedar Terrace is over 55, close to 60% poverty rate. Does mixed income offset that? And what he told me was, mixed income is relatively new. Most of the modern mixed income is after 2000, so there isn't a whole lot of data on it. But what it looks like is it works best in highly populated areas such as New York, Boston, Washington, D.C., where you have a strong demand for market-based units. You know, New York is, you know, the stories are people look in the obituaries to see if they can land an apartment because it's so tight there. And he tells me that in those kind of areas, mixed income has a good, you know, a fair shot of working. He says elsewhere, in places where we have higher vacancy rates and in our market rate apartment sectors, it's just not as viable an option. So he would recommend against it as not affirmatively furthering fair housing. So that's kind of how this plan came about. It's the only plan I know of that's based on expert research and recognized standards. It's consistent with some of the legal cases, like in Dallas and others, where the orders are to deconcentrate and regionalize. And so that's where it came from. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. Mr. Hurst?
It's the first written proposal I had seen from the GLO. In there were a couple of things that we had never talked about. One was an affirmation that we had to make that this plan, and it was a whole paragraph, had to affirmatively further fair housing. Okay? There were some other things in there that Jorge admits he misinterpreted something I had said. And he forwarded to Mr. Ramirez the city and GHA's counter-proposal. In it, we asked for representations from HUD and GLO that the plan met fair housing, and also for indemnification that it met fair housing. On Friday, September 7th, that's this past Friday, about 4 p.m. I received a call from...
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
Put forward.
Do I have a...
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought that was your motion.
I'll make a motion to forward. I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Alternative Plan 2. That's the plan that Mr. Brown was discussing with us earlier during the meeting.
I'll second.
On to the federal and state authorities, in addition to the plan that's already been submitted to them. And I don't do that. We did discuss this item some during executive session, and there was a concern that this might be seen as disrespectful in some way to submit a second plan. And that's not my intention in making the motion. I do feel that it's important that we send a plan that actually affirmatively furthers fair housing so that we're on record presenting such a plan.
I would like to comment on alternate plan number 2. I think it's important that the city sends something to HUD and also to the GLO that doesn't violate fair housing. And this is the only plan that we have that doesn't violate fair housing. They might look at it and throw it in the garbage can, but at least we've made an effort, and we can always, if we ever end up having to go to court or anything, we can always say, we sent a plan that fits fair housing and helps people.
And we chose to do Plan 1, and we're trying to put in there, in addition to what GLO, because it was GLO's plan, correct? that
Yes.
Plan 1, it was GLOs,
Yes, ma'am.
that we want fair housing, and I believe we all agree, we do not agree Plan 1 is going to promote fair housing, and that we're going to state that...
I'm not an expert on fair housing, whether this meets fair housing. There is no doubt in anyone's mind that 2 probably meets fair housing better than any other plan. There is also no doubt that you ought to add,
True.
but that's the feeling out there.
I understand that, but we know that's not true.
And, you know, this was a month or 6 weeks ago, and now we're down to the last 2 weeks submitting a second plan which moves the low-income, for a reason. Because, I mean, absolutely for a reason. But everything in the world is used against us. The reason is that the mainland has the high income, high work, the jobs, whatever you want to call it. But I'm telling you what the Secretary of Health...
I think the council's been clear that we want to work with HUD, GLO, the advocates, GHA, make sure that anything that's adopted furthers fair housing.
We now are going to vote on the motion. All those in favor